Hello and welcome to the programme. The AI revolution runs on electricity. Lots of it, vast amounts of it. The data centres being built right now to power the next generation of AI consume as much energy as a small city. Last year, the world's biggest tech companies spent more than $400 billion building them, and they need more of them. Many more of them. But there's a problem. In the United States, 4 in 10 of the data centres that are being planned for this year are at serious risk of delay. Not enough power, not enough equipment, and not enough people to build them. Why? Also on the programme this week, Coachella, the world's most glamorous music festival. But some of the online influencers you may have seen pictured in the California desert, alongside the biggest stars, were fake. Not real. They don't exist. AI generated to promote brands and to make money. Plus, we'll also talk this week about the late Val Kilmer, appearing in a new film 1 year after his death. With us this week to talk about it, Parmi Olsen, who is a technology columnist at Bloomberg. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Also here, Dr. Sasha Lucioni, a computer scientist specialising in AI and its environmental impact, and also in the studio with us. Good to have her back here. Dr. Stephanie Hare, colleague, author and AI expert, to give you your full title. Parmi, let us start with this issue of data centres. We're building lots of them. They are powering the AI revolution. Why are so many of them on hold?
Yeah, so this is really an issue of bottlenecks, and you sort of alluded to it in your introduction. There's the issue of power, so getting access to actual power on electricity grids that are very, very old and haven't received a lot of investment over many decades in the United States. Also equipment, getting access to things like transformers or switchgear, which are the types of equipments you need to actually run data centers. There's also a huge bottleneck getting them. It could take up to 5 years to get some of that equipment, particularly because a lot of it comes from China, and recent U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods has made that even more difficult. And then there's also just getting the people, the talent, the electricians, and the people with the skill set who can actually construct and run these data centers. So all those things combined have meant that at a time when there is this rapacious demand for energy from tech companies, it's actually very difficult to build them fast enough.
Does that problem become more acute in the energy crisis we're in currently?
I think it does to some extent, and it's more of a problem for the so-called hyperscalers, the big tech companies like Meta, Alphabet, Amazon, etc., who are actually the ones who have to shell out for these energy costs. And so they're setting up these kind of mini nuclear reactors that can actually provide energy specifically for the data center and use renewable sources instead of gas. But at the moment, even getting those up and running is logistically very, very difficult. It's time consuming. There aren't any actually that are operational just yet. And so right now, I think the main source of energy is gas.
Should we give our viewers just a scale of what we're talking about here? Scott Galloway, who might be coming on the programme next week over in New York, he says OpenAI alone, Stephanie, will need 20% of current US electricity capacity at $10 trillion. That's extraordinary.
It's extraordinary for a company that is yet to turn a profit and which is under huge pressure to demonstrate value ahead of an IPO as well. So it's just worth saying that all of these companies, not just OpenAI, were making very big promises about their data structure build-out plans as of last year. We've already seen the US-UK technology deal. That's on hold. We've seen OpenAI have to pull out of some of its Stargate, the big US data center infrastructure plan. They've had to pull out on some of those things. Maybe we are walking back. So that question of will the AI bubble burst? It might not burst. It might just sort of slightly deflate.
Which is a consideration, isn't it? When you think that actually if you're going to plug these into the grid and you don't know whether these companies are going to survive in the scale, or perhaps they're even bigger than they are right now. It's a difficult thing to plan.
It's a difficult thing to plan when you're not a planned economy, which is why when we're looking at the data center rollout in a country like China and comparing that to the United States or indeed here in Europe, we get very different pictures.
Right. Dr. Lucioni, Sasha, I'm going to call you Sasha. Does it make sense for the US president to be so vehemently opposed to renewable energy, given the scale that we're talking?
Well, the problem is that the data centers are being built so quickly that renewable capacity has trouble keeping up, especially in rural areas, especially outside of places where renewables are typically the case. So I think that currently the emphasis is build faster, build bigger, and they don't want to wait around for solar or wind, which is why essentially most of the data centers that are coming online as quickly are essentially bringing in turbines on the back of trucks, natural gas. It's like bring your own energy essentially, and most of that
And they have the
is
money for that.
non-renewable.
I mean, these
They have
companies
the
have the money.
money, but actually currently there's a bottleneck even when you have the money because there's not enough turbines to power all these data centers because there's a backlog nowadays, and even these turbines can't be produced fast enough to respond to demand.
Palmy, at Bloomberg, recently you highlighted an issue in northern Spain with the data center build out there, which has actually been held up as a model for the rest of Europe. But for the people who live around these projects, the reality is sometimes very different. Why?
I think it's a common story. We're also seeing in the United States a lot of pushback from local residents in areas where companies want to build data centers. And in northern Spain, there have been the situation is that AWS, which is the cloud business of Amazon, sent letters to local people saying, we want to buy your land, giving them sometimes 4 days notice to say yes or no. And some of these people in northern Spain actually thought it was a scam at first. One lady went to her local town hall and even they didn't know. So it's a real kind of land grab almost to try and get land that is relatively cheap in an area where energy costs are relatively low and that are sparsely populated as well. It seems like an ideal situation for building a data center. But at the same time, there is the reality for people who do live there, and there are people who live there, that they have to give up that land, or maybe suddenly you've got this eyesore in a place that you've lived in for many generations.
If you're in a community like that, though, and you've already struggled to get natural resources or to get electricity to get yourselves on the grid, does the arrival of a big AI company help in that process? Perhaps it could help a community.
In some respects, and the funny part in that is that governments, local governments often frame data center build outs as being great for jobs.
Yeah.
But I think you're conflating in that situation permanent jobs with construction jobs, which are temporary. And so when you build out a data center, you're going to hire maybe.
Are they not necessarily big employers once the kit is there?
No, I think in a typical data center, you might have about 100 people, most of them cleaners and security people. Whereas for the build out, sure, hundreds, maybe thousands of people, but then that's only temporary.
All right, I'm going to bring in an audience question quite early in the programme this week because it fits what you're talking about. It's from James in the UK. He says, Sasha, AI companies continue to minimise this environmental impact. He points specifically to Sam Altman's recent claim that AI's water usage is minimal. James says that's simply not true. He also tells us that younger generations are increasingly boycotting generative AI for environmental reasons. So here's his question. Should mainstream media be doing more to hold these companies to account?
Definitely. Actually, a recent Guardian study found that the big tech companies were lobbying very, very hard against transparency to make sure that, I mean, citing confidentiality to not include any energy figures or water figures about data centers. And so we're seeing them play dirty, and I think it's time to ask for accountability. And I think that especially in a time where people are increasingly sustainability conscious, so we make our decisions based on the environment and ethical concerns. We need this information, whether it be for choosing one AI model over the other, for using AI or not using AI, right? There's lots of decisions that we make on an everyday basis that we just don't have the information for. And especially since AI has become such a common technology, we definitely need these numbers, and these companies have them. It's just a matter of giving them maybe positive and less positive incentives for sharing them.
Well, let's try and choose to look at this positively because we're all using the technology. We're going to use it in our work. So we need these companies to be successful if we're going to employ AI fully. What does a responsible data center look like, Sasha?
So you can definitely create them in a way that's more integrated in the existing infrastructure. So currently, the data centers are being built out in a very kind of bigger is better kind of way. So typically they're outside of cities, they're huge, like warehouse sized, but they can really be integrated. Like the smaller data centers can be in basements. The heat can be reused to heat office buildings or university campuses. It's much easier to use renewable energy or a mix at least of renewable energy if there's less
So
capacity that's
partnering,
needed.
you think that maybe part of this answer is them partnering with other companies?
Partnering and rethinking the paradigm. So currently it's like we need the biggest data centers, we need sovereign AI, we need, bigger, let's build it out. Even in here, like I'm in Canada, it's the same thing. We need our own data center, let's build it out. But instead of thinking of that as the when you have a hammer, everything's a nail, I think we should be thinking about the nails that we have and thinking about, okay, so what do we need this data center for? Is it for a university? Is it for a private company? Is there a way of, for example, incentivizing some mix of renewables or for example, helping them build it out in a way that isn't, bring your own turbine on a truck kind of situation. And so I think there are ways of being more agile if we rethink our way of doing AI. And it's not only for data centers, same thing for AI models. Instead of being like, we need the most energy intensive model for every single task, we can have smaller models, for example, on device models. Instead of having every query be dispatched to the cloud, we can have AI models running locally on our smartphones and computers. So I think we should really be rethinking a little bit the way that we design and deploy AI currently.
Quick question just to satisfy my curiosity, Sasha. Quick answers if you could. There are some companies that are developing these air cooling systems to reduce water consumption. Do they work?
Yes, but it's often a trade-off of using more energy and less water. So often it's true that you can, for example, recycle water. So essentially water gets cycled through and it heats up and you have to cool it down. So either you need cooling towers or sometimes, you cool it down with energy, with electricity. And so it's often a trade-off where they're using more energy but less water. It's a closed loop system.
And at the outset, you said that very often these data centers are outstripping what the renewable industry can provide for them. But there are good examples, and I wanted to point to them, where data centers have been sited very close to renewable energy. So Iceland is using geothermal, Norway using hydroelectric. Is that an example that other countries should be following?
Yes, but I think that very few countries, I mean, in the current state of things, have that extra capacity. And also, if these data centers continue to be so, like, for example, if a data center uses as much energy as 100,000 homes, there's very few grids, renewable grids, that can provide that energy on such a short notice. Even, for example, in Quebec, where I live, we have hydro, but we don't have the extra capacity for, in 2 years, an extra 100,000 homes to be built. It has to be gradual. And so it's really the timelines that often don't line up. And this is why natural gas is the cheapest, fastest solution. And often there are long-term plans. Often it's like, well, in 10 years, we're going to do renewables. In 10 years, we're going to do this. But in the meantime, it adds a lot of emissions.
Okay, well, you might have questions on what you've been hearing about data centers. You might have some strong thoughts on it. AI Decoded at bbc.co.uk. Now, since Stephanie has been focusing on clarity and regulation, I've got a story for her. Let me show you some images. These are images that look entirely real, but the people in them are fake.
My Coachella week was so much fun. Let me take you around. It's a secret. You can be in Coachella as me just by a few prompts. Stay with me till the end for the prompts.
They are computer-generated influencers who were seen photographed on Instagram alongside some of the most famous people at Coachella, which is, those in the know will know, is this very trendy music festival in the desert, in one of the desert valleys in California. How many of those engaging in these photographs knew that the people they were pictured alongside were fake? I would suggest not very many. I'm not even sure that Coachella knew that there were fake influencers in the crowd. Stephanie, we've talked about this on the programme before, about AI-generated beauty, the impact it has on young people. This, for me, actually, I was reading about it this week, this feels like the next chapter of that.
Yeah. And again, the law is just not fit for purpose on this. I think we're really going to have to get to a point where we have laws on the books that say if you have someone that's pretending to be a human being, it has to be labeled. It just has to, because you're dealing with children, first of all. So like anyone that's under the age of 18 needs to be protected. But you're also dealing with older people. You're also dealing with the potential for scam, for fraud, for misinformation and disinformation. So this would just solve a lot of things.
Palmy, who's behind these images? What do they want?
From what I understand, it is mostly agencies. It's not, it's not a cottage industry of people working from home. There are, agencies most of the time in Europe, in places like London and on the continent, who are producing these as branding exercises and as an opportunity for a brand to get a sponsorship.
money in it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about it, an influencer who has a brand sponsorship deal will be quite costly, because if they want to go to Coachella, they want to go business class, maybe. They want to get a hotel. They want to get some other freebies. But if you have an influencer who you are sponsoring to hold your can of whatever in the photograph, they're not going to have a bad day or get old or look weird in the photo. They're always going to look great. It's funny, ahead of this program, I actually looked at some of these influencers who were in Coachella, and it was amazing. Like, one of them had about 170,000 followers, and it was pictures of her with Justin Bieber, with the Kardashians, with Madonna, and no one in the comments was saying this isn't real. All the comments were kind of congratulatory. And there was no disclosure at all on the Instagram profile that it was AI generated. So I think a lot of people in good faith would look at it and think this is really happening.
The obvious problem is, Sasha, that the very famous person who's gone to Coachella can say to someone who might be advertising kryptonite next to them, look, I don't want to be advertising kryptonite, and they can push them away. They have no choice. They have no say in an AI-generated person being put next to them in a photograph that they pose for unknowingly.
Yeah, in a world of AI agents, humans lose their own agency, I think, to some extent, and especially famous people, because there's so many likenesses of them on the internet that it's very, very easy to generate a false image or video now of a celebrity.
Stephanie, didn't we talk about New York bringing in new regulation to stop this? I think you had to put on your website whether you were using an AI generated influencer. But there's, I mean, some of these pictures from Coachella do that, but plenty of them don't.
Yeah, and that's the enforcement thing. Like, there are all sorts of laws that are on
Plus, from state to state, it's different, right?
Exactly. And how, whose job is it to police that? And how are they able to get the accountability that they need? So again, this is a case of if you were to take them to court, that's going to take years, right? It's going to cost a lot of money, etc. So it's kind of like everything that we saw about accountability with social media not being very effective.
I mean, Coachella themselves could just say, enough, you can't do this. It's
could.
up to the organizer.
They absolutely could. And I think, what you mentioned earlier about the celebrities, you might want to just play the world's tiniest violin for these people for being in these photographs and potentially compromising situations. But I mean, ultimately, if they do get upset and if the brands get upset, I think that's perhaps going to be potentially even more effective than actual regulation in getting enforcement. So
what about the platforms, though? I mean, Instagram, TikTok, they're profiting from these engagements.
Yes, and technically on these platforms, you are supposed to disclose if something is AI generated. The fact is, nobody actually follows that rule, and Meta does have automated systems that will try and look for things that are AI generated and tag them, but it's an almost impossible task because there's hundreds of thousands of posts made every day, and many, many, many are slipping through the net. Now, the thing is, it is possible if they really wanted to. There are ways to put a cryptographic signature on actual photographic images called CP2A, but that's just not something that the tech companies are investing in, because if you think about it, there is a commercial incentive to just let this carry on, because to your point earlier, do people actually like this? Weirdly, the public don't hate AI avatars. They're kind of okay with it.
If they know. I mean, how many people really know? Because some of these are really good and they're getting better.
I think that's just going to make it harder to deal with.
So weird, because everyone talks about being authentic and brands are all about your values, and then they do this stuff that's so fake. And people eat it up. Weird.
Do we still call California the Wild West? No, maybe not. But this is the Wild West.
Yeah, this absolutely is.
Now, the late Val Kilmer was one of the greats. Do we agree on that? Yeah, Top
sure.
Gun, Batman,
Real
forever.
genius.
Yeah,
Wow.
The Doors. I liked him in that. One of the Hollywood greats, one of the versatile actors of Hollywood as well. And he died a year ago, as many of you will know, age 65, after a long and sad battle with throat cancer. But he had been cast in a film a few years earlier. It's called As Deep as the Grave. It's a historical drama about the American Southwest. And of course, he didn't make it to set because he was too ill at the end. But this week, the trailer for that movie debuted at CinemaCon in Las Vegas. He's in it, and every scene in which he is in, and every line that he speaks, of course, is generated entirely by AI.
Isho. Lee. Don't fear the dead, and don't fear me.
His children gave their blessing to this, Stephanie. And just so everybody knows, the filmmakers followed the guidelines, spoke to the unions. Kilmer, in fact, himself embraced AI in his final movie, Top Gun Maverick. His voice was recreated by AI, so he wasn't oblivious to this. Is this the blueprint, do you think, for AI in Hollywood, an ethical way of using it, or does it, for you, open a door that we can't close?
I think it's just about choice. So I like the idea that if directors and other artists want to experiment with AI, that they are doing so mindfully, that they're trying to come up with an ethical standard that is no doubt going to be discussed and may eventually be formalized. I also think it's really important for any creative person who doesn't want their likeness, their biometrics, or their creative output to be used in this way to be able to say no. Right. So in that case, for anybody who's a Hollywood actor listening and watching our show, as we know they are, they would want to be
We're
speaking with
A-lister
their
all the way.
they want to be speaking with their agents and with their team and their lawyers to be really clear about that. So, how do you want your likeness being used while you're alive? And then how do you want it being used after your death? So in this case, Val Kilmer's children were fine with it, his estate's fine with it, and everything was done with everyone being, I think, as ethical as they can be. Other actors have made different choices.
Can I just say, Stephanie, for the record, that if you're going to use my likeness for AI Decoded into the future, I am happy for that, so long as you pay the royalties to my estate. Just
Okay.
on the record, so
Fair.
we're all clear.
Noted.
Sasha, I mean, obviously, Hollywood actors are a gift, aren't they, for AI? Because there's hundreds of hours of film of them. They've been in lots of performances, and so in fact, I think this performance that Kilmer of this movie was reconstructed from 40 films, hundreds of hours of footage. So, as long as you've signed up to this, sky's the limit.
I think that's a very hard ethical question. I've seen a lot of papers. I even saw a theater play on this topic, especially after death. Actually, I think that's a really important point. Who can opt in? How can you opt out if you're dead? And also, what does this mean for the community? Because if there's peer pressure, for example, and I think that actually AI was one of the sticking points during the strikes a couple of years ago, right? To what extent is there union pressure? Is there community pressure to opt in? Can you continue opting out in this new world, right? And it's similar to what a lot of workers are facing as well. I'm hearing a lot of people being like, "Well, I'm forced to use AI in my workplace. We even have dashboards for tracking it," and so it's really this pressure that we're seeing to use AI. And I think that does make people give up some of their individual choices if they feel pressured to. So, for example, if you're a young actor and you want to make a name for yourself, but you don't want to use AI, but you have this peer pressure around you, can you really opt out without having a negative impact on your career?
Yeah, and I think Hollywood has already this history of recycling old films and making sequels and making remakes. And I think there is already this tendency to want to maximize profits by going back to whatever works. And if that's the incentive driving the remake of an actor who has died, I think in the end that can actually put younger, fresh talent out of work if it's just the kind of the same icons appearing over and over again for the next 100 years. And to Sasha's point as well, I think where that pressure comes from, like I've spoken to a company that does virtual reality concerts or avatar concerts, and they have had pressure from the families of artists who have died to try and recreate the deceased artist for a concert.
Not knowing whether there's consent or not for that.
And that's a very
the
gray
deceased
area.
artist.
It's because we're talking about people who died maybe 10, 20 years ago, icons, putting pressure on them it's a new revenue source for the family left behind, for the estate.
We're out of time. Parmi, Sasha, Stephanie, thank you very much indeed. AI Decoded next week. We think Scott Galloway is coming on. I'm putting that out there so he does come on next week. So do tune in for that. If you have any thoughts on anything we've discussed, do email us, aidecoded@bbc.co.uk. And I'm going to put on screen for you the QR code for the AI Decoded playlist, which is on YouTube. Some of you struggling to find it. There it is. If you scan the QR code, you'll be able to find it. All the backup episodes are there, so do take a look at that. And don't forget, if you want to watch us again, we are on the BBC iPlayer. That's all the housekeeping. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to our guest this week. We'll see you next time.